Well, hey guys, good morning. It is Brent Abel here, webtennis.com. What is going on out there? That dude over there, the great Jim McLennan from essentialtennisinstruction.com. One of my all-time favorite players, coaches, humans, real smarty pants guy. I know it pisses him off every time I say smarty pants, but it's true. And Mac, what's going on this morning? How are you?
Well, I'd prefer much more of an extensive introduction, but that's good enough,
Well, I'm only supposed to go for 7 minutes, around 7. That's the whole thing.
Whatever you do. I'm learning how to use StreamYard. Never been here before.
It's a pretty good deal. We get to go both to Facebook and YouTube at the same time. So,
man.
Hey,
don't get me started on Facebook. That's okay.
Okay. Well, I don't blame you. So guys, look, Jim and I this morning are going to talk about, we're going to start off by talking about the Tom Stowe's all-court forcing game. Knowing Jim, we may get into some other topics rather quickly, which would be fine. Always good stuff. Jim McLennan at the Fremont Hills Country Club in Los Altos Hills. That's right, Los Altos Hills, California. A little south of San Francisco on the peninsula. And Mac, how long have you been there?
I've been there quite some time.
Yes.
I don't always say for fear if they find out, they run me out.
The Alou brothers haven't run you out yet?
Oh, it happens quite a bit, actually.
Good. Well, listen, let's get rolling with your Tom Stowe story. How you got hooked up with Tom. When was that? How'd that get started? And yeah, kind of bring us up to speed with you and Tom.
I was traveling with Jim Irwin, who was at that point in 1970 Tom's assistant pro, and we drove to Florida, played some tennis there, and that experience really was all about Tom. And Jim had convinced me that if I would go to Tom, I would improve dramatically. And so when I came back to Northern Cal, I went up there to interview for a lesson because you couldn't just walk in and get a lesson. And if I remember, his rate was $100 an hour in 1970.
This was at the Berkeley Tennis Club?
No, Silverado.
So he was already at Silverado then. Okay.
But it was a 50% discount if you were still playing tennis or trying to, as I was. So anyway, it was entirely about balance. And the introduction was sitting on a stool. And I think you've done the same, Brent. And even one of our internet colleagues has shown some lessons that he's taking from a high performance coach. And I thought to myself, if that same guy had gone to Tom, the instruction would be upside down about the first move. He talks about dead hands and how the shoulders are and whether the shoulders are up by your neck or down and where the tension is. And then I can somehow remember that in many lessons, he would say, no, hit it harder. No, hit it harder. No, really hit it harder. Now don't fight it and hit it harder. And it wasn't that you had to hit it harder, but you had to discover how to hit. And so many players learn this on their own. Many players learn this without Tom Stowe. But I was attempting to play a version of his game, and maybe I was doing it already because we were serving and volleying then, but this was all about applying pressure. And I've done a lot of writing on it, a lot of reading about it. Even a lot of it is very much parallel with the famous coach from Puerto Rico, Welby Van Horn. And I think that when I watch the players at our club, my biggest impression is over effort and not an awareness of the court. But it's very hard to show once people have played so much tennis that they kind of think, well, no, I mean, I know where to be on the court. And so it was a wonderful experience. And Tom wrote me a letter of recommendation once, and even on another time, and he probably did the same to you, he said, why don't you get out of here and go play tournaments for a while and see what you can do? So I did. And I played a lot in my 30s and 40s, and then it slowed down in my 50s and almost hardly any now with body parts, but it is what it is.
So tell me about your takeaways from Tom. I mean, are you still teaching the Stowe method? Have you hybridized it to something different? Have you hybridized it to I mean, some of the guys that I worked with Tom, with Steve Stefanke, Doug King, and John Hubble, I think each one of those guys have come up with their own version. What about you, Mac? Are you still teaching, like when you get a new student, are you teaching some form of the Stowe method? Has it changed at all because of the rackets, because of the string technology, because of, I don't know.
That's a good question. I think it depends on who the student is and what they might hope to accomplish and how open they are. I had a wonderful chance a couple of years ago with a youngster that was very open, and without ever using any of these words, he sort of learned the version of that. Takes the ball early, chip and charge, lob, drop shot, variety. I think it may have to do more with the rackets and expectation from a student. And I think this gets way deep into what you and I do or try to do. It feels to me as though most people we know have a lot of experience reading and hearing and learning about the game. But it's very tricky when every racket ad is about more power. And if you go online, every link is for explosive. And nobody sells a racket that says this is a ball control racket, or that they say this is a racket that tells you where to be on the court. And so, yes, I still teach that way. But no, I use far less words. And even in some regard, it doesn't matter to me anymore if they know what it is we're doing, as much as having them do drills that sort of trick them into doing it. And yeah, I think I went down a hole with all the rain and the smoke and did a lot of reading about something called a coaching assessment. I've never seen this before, probably 10 pages long. And it's asking what you do as a coach. And the thing that comes out of it is that this one group says, if you want to learn a sport, don't ever go to an expert at the sport, go to an expert at coaching. And I thought, well, what's that? And it tells me that we accepted Tom's method because we wanted it, truly. And I think he could dumb it down some for people that wanted a version of it. But I'm fascinated about how people come with their own preconceptions. And now I try hardly ever to overcome that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think that, well, at least what I'm hearing is that there is so much information out there online, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on videos on Facebook. It's just that you're right. I mean, it's all about, and you said the word explosive. It's really about that. And it's as opposed to learning about the geometry of the court.
Yeah.
And that's really what I got from Tom. That was, and I had 18 months with Tom every Wednesday morning from 9 to 12 with those three other guys, which should have been enough time. It probably wasn't literally every week, but I'm saying on average, it was probably 18 months, probably 35 times that I was with him over those 18 months. And I didn't get the complete package for whatever reason. And the package I did get was we're going to hit another 15 minutes. I'm going to underhand feed you, Brent, another 15 minutes of that short ball forehand approach.
Yeah.
And it's going to sit up. You're going to take it at the top of the rise or the top of the bounce, and you're going to do this with it. And basically, it was just so that I felt really comfortable not only hitting that shot, but ending up on top of her inside the service line when the point was over. And I still remember vividly, one day, I'm so bored with this. God dang it. Do we have to hit another one? And I said, can we do something else? He says, hey, look, the reason we do this is because it's just a hell of a lot more fun to play this way.
Good.
And that really kind of put it into my head that, right, it was about court positioning. And so I turned that into serve and volley. I never had a great serve, but I could actually make the transitional volley or the half volley or put the brakes on early and let the ball bounce up on a short return and play the approach. But for me, it was less about technique and more about could I end up inside the service line at the end of the point. And it just worked out that the more I did that, I started to take a set off of the Dean slow bombs. I started to take a set off of, some of the top guys. And eventually, as we were talking about before we hit or before we went live, is I started getting so many experiences in terms of playing practice sets, matches, tournament matches, that I just built up this foundation of playing a lot.
But playing that way.
Playing exactly that way and just completely look in the beginning when I would come back from a session with Mr. Stowe and the guys on a Wednesday, I'd go back to the BTC, Berkeley Tennis Club, go out there and have a match scheduled for 2:00. And for the first year, Jim, I was all over the map. I was launching balls, right? I mean, I was trying to do the Stowe stuff in terms of the ground strokes, and I had no control of it. And yet eventually, he just kept encouraging me. He just kept saying, just keep looking for that short ball. Just keep coming in. And that worked until I got to a certain age group. And then I had to learn a few other parts of the game that I never really got from Tom. So look, let's take a look. I want to pick your brain here on the all-court forcing game. Let's see if I can bring this up. And here we go. So,
good work.
I'm going to read this, and then let's kind of dive into it. I can leave this up here, or we can go back to just both of us on the screen if there's something you want to. Okay, so this is from Tom's book that he wrote in 1948, as I recall, from the Tom Stowe teaching method. And the practice stroke, or no, was it the practice stroke developer? No, the stroke developer.
I'm still trying to build a stroke developer with Dave Houston.
Okay, good.
The progress is dreadfully slow.
Okay, so here we go. This is from Tom's book, The Forcing Game by Tom. So the forcing game is based on the principle of continuous pressure. It is a game for advanced players who have acquired all the strokes and therefore are able to control the ball from all positions. It should be called an all-court forcing game, for it is too often confused with just a net game. Coming into the net is definitely a part of the game and should be used as a climax in rallies or when the opponent hits a short shot, but is only a part of the whole. A player who can make sound coming in shots and can volley accurately will be a constant worry for his opponent in trying not to hit short balls. Will tend to make more errors than he would otherwise. To play the all-court forcing game, it is necessary to have, one, a strong first serve and an accurate spin for the second serve. A hard first serve, which will put the opponent on the defensive and cause errors, is, of course, the best. However, this is not absolutely essential, but a serve that will keep the opponent from making a forcing shot is essential. Two, the ground strokes, both forehand and backhand, must be sound so that A, the return of serve be deep, the shots from the backcourt be firm and well placed, and C, the coming in shot be hit flat on the top of the bounce.
That's it, coming in flat at the top of the bounce. And boy, that's hard to do for many of these top spin explosive players.
That's right.
Carry on.
Number three, the volley must be accurate and fast enough to put the ball away. A blocked volley is not enough. A player with only this type of shot cannot win the point when the opening appears. Four, the smash. For those of you unfamiliar with that term, the overhead, is a must in this type of play for the opponent of a player with a weak overhead can lob defensively too often. This does not give the forcing player enough percentage off his approach shots, and he will find himself in trouble. Smashes, like volleys, must be put away, not only from the standpoint of winning the point, but also the mental effects such shots will have on the opponent. The player of this all-court forcing game must always keep in mind the fact that he is playing another human being and that the pressure he is applying has a very definite effect on the mental attitude of his opponent. It takes nerve, determination, and strokes to play this type of game, and only the strong will master it. However, from these few will emerge the future greats, the future great players of the world. You know, there's so much for me that I could pick out in there, Mac, and you picked out one thing, which was this right here, that the coming in shot be flat at the top of the bounce. And one of the things that I think is taught so much is the grips, especially on the forehand, are now extreme enough to where I think a lot of players get locked, meaning they want to make sure they have that grip, so they're pretty firm on that grip. And when you come in, and I practice with some guys who maybe don't even have a semi-Western but have got a full Eastern forehand grip, they're still coming in on a low ball, and not even at the top of the bounce. They're coming in on a low ball or taking a low ball and trying to top it. And, you know, for me, when I got this, what you're mentioning here, it just made more sense to hit it flat because it got from point A, the contact point, to point B quicker. And it actually, if you hit it well enough, it actually kind of moved through the bounce better than I think the reality of too much topspin now, where it can sit up. So
I think the other thing on that, Brent, is that most everyone with heavy topspin prefers to play the ball on the down as it descends. And so this is sort of unfamiliar area to take it higher. But if the top of the bounce is higher than the level of the net, you don't need any topspin to bring it down. It's almost like you're hitting down on the approach, not up.
Love it. This part here that's highlighted,
yeah,
to me is like it was the thing. I mean, I really, you know, for in the beginning when I was working with Tom, I was working on technique, but I didn't really understand this part. I just thought, well, gosh, I mean, the Doug Kings and the Steve Stefankis and those guys, come on. I mean, you know, I'm going to play an approach, and the chances of me getting past are pretty good. Well, I remember playing a tournament right when I was kind of into the, you know, probably a year into working with Tom, and I was playing a top guy, and he said this. He said, just keep coming in, and what you're going to find is that this guy's going to turn human. And sure enough, I mean, it took me till maybe 4 or 5 all in the third against this top guy, but I kept coming in. And I remember I had a break point. It was either a 4 all or 5 all. I came in on just you know, an average at best approach, and the guy shanked it. I mean, and I just that to me was the epiphany. Like, wow, this works.
Yeah,
this works in terms of the continuous pressure, and how it can affect that attitude of the opponent. So. Let's go back to, where are we here? We're here. Okay. So what was your takeaway? I mean, when you worked with Tom, was he talking about the all-court forcing game? Was he talking more technique? What was your takeaway from that?
More about technique, starting with the stool. And then I think I may have done a portion of this, but really holding my ground. I remember a lot of times I would be returning serve, and he had his hands very lightly on the back of on my back. And the concept was, don't back up and don't hit him with the backswing. And these are all the things that we understand. I love his term dead hands, and how when you prepare, it's the shoulders and the hands don't do much. And the difficulty to play the ball at the top of the bounce is that the racket goes back too far. So I think more than anything, my return of serve got better because of that. And even in my experience, if it felt like the pressure was working, I was sometimes coming in on their first serve if I could handle it, because then if they thought, what's going on? Now I really was in their head. And so I've been beaten by many players that could do a version of this to me, meaning the serve is too big that I can't control the return, or the ground strokes are too deep that I can't get in. But at a level, whatever level my level was, this worked very well against many players. And I sometimes am sad about how the rackets and the game has changed so much that this is a harder story to convey, much harder story. And even with some of the players that we have at our club that have gone to college or are going to college, they sort of know what we're working on, but it's too rare. And I think what Tom was good at was saying, this is the only way we're going to do this. There's no maybe here. And there's even a couple of players now that I know would get better if they applied a lot of this to the return of second serve, but they're hitters. And hitters are hitters, and there's nothing wrong with being a hitter. But it could be that everything we see on TV leads us to an area that we can't really do because they are so highly skilled. But you could say that Federer plays a version of this. He takes the return inside the baseline. He knows how to come in, and he can finish at the net. And even he was very critical of Zverev, who couldn't do any of this. And maybe that's why they went to South America together, because the guy had been trained so well, he didn't even know how to move forward. He looked like a hitting partner when he was playing matches, but he still got, a successful career. So it's really interesting how to develop this and apply it. And then I think, Brent, here's the story. Can you show this to people that have somewhat of a background, or is it too late to show them anything? Yeah. Why don't you?
Well, look, I think if we're talking about senior players, what are we talking about?
No, anybody that contacts you online or at your club or in Colorado and says, show me how to play.
Yeah.
How do you do it? Or they wouldn't say, show me how to play, but show me how to play this style.
Yeah. Well, I would get a video. If I can't watch them play, then I've got to get them to send me some video of 5-6 games where they stay on the same side of the camera. Just have a practice partner say, all right, we're going to play 6 games. I'm going to serve 3 times. You'll serve 3 times. I'm going to stay on this side of the court. And I just want to see what their instincts are. I want to see, because most of the time what happens is someone comes to me and says, look, I really need to work on my backhand.
Right. I've been reading about your backhand articles.
And what happens is I go, well, all right, let's take a look at it. But I want to see it in how you use it in a match. I don't want to feed you a couple underhand balls and look at the technique. Let's see how you use it in a match. And very often what you find, at least what I find out, is the technique's good enough. It's adequate enough to be able to at least keep the ball in play, at least keep it deep, at least keep the point neutral. But the problem is when they start to feel that now I've hit a return to serve, that's shot 1. I've now hit a second ball, which is maybe a forehand. Now here comes a third ball, which is to my backhand. And it's not really the backhand as much as it is, I just don't trust my game enough to stay in the point as long as I need to. And
so that's the question. How do you get somebody past their level of trust? Can you?
Yeah. I mean, I just think, look, and I do go more from the thing of what's the right shot from that premise, which is 2 things. Where do you want the ball to land over there? And where do you want to move to next? So what I try to impress upon them is we can make your backhand better by simply where you move to next on the court. So if you add that layer of court positioning to the shot they just hit.
I like that.
Then what happens is you don't change the stroke. You don't change the with the all-court forcing game, you now get them to believe that, well, maybe if I move to a different part of the court, rather than hitting my backhand and backing up, why not hit my backhand and put myself 12 inches inside the baseline? Are the chances that great that if you stand inside the baseline or on top of the baseline that your opponent's going to constantly hit the ball deep to where you're going to be eaten up? No, it just doesn't happen that way. So I take it more from court positioning. Where do you want to be in the court? And I also try to say, why not at least end up the point as you're moving forward to try to come up into the service line. And if you can end up inside the service line, we're talking about singles, awesome, great. And I think it does require that style of play. What we just read does require that, you didn't play football in college and you've got this knee that's completely blown out and that stuff is doubles. I mean, you really can't play. I mean, I don't care how great a shape you're in. If you have some kind of a permanent injury like that, it just becomes a little bit tougher. But if someone can, has got some kind of level of fitness, as Tom said, it's just a hell of a lot more fun to play that way.
That's a good way to put it. That's a very good way to put it. It's more fun.
And he, what Tom was all about, at least my interpretation of Tom. And I do remember one day up there with the fellas in Napa on that junior high school court that we worked on, wasn't it Silverado? He was talking about somehow we'd taken a break and we're talking about a discussion like, someone said, all STO students are kind of robots. They all look the same. And he said that couldn't be further from the truth. He said, my job is to build a solid foundation. And the first thing you said today when I asked you about your work with Tom was balance. He said, if you're off balance, how can you play the game? I don't care what kind of technique you've got, what kind of strategy. So I've got to get you on balance. And I do remember those first 12, 15 minutes every session, we would just move around the court, rehearse strokes, but he would look at you and go, there would be no tennis balls. And he'd just go, Mr. Abel, no, come on, man. I mean, so, and I even remember what you just said, he would kind of come up behind you. And I can remember moving around the court and he'd kind of tap you on the back and dang it. I mean, you kind of fall forward. Yeah. But he said, my job is to build a foundation of balance, posture. And then he said, and then I want you to lay your own personality down on top of that foundation. So he, if you look at Doug King, Kinger's about as solid as you can get. And he really Doug King developed the classic Stowe all court game. He could play from all parts of the court. So I don't know how we got into that, but here's the other thing, Mac, that I want to.
Well, let me throw one in. I came across something by Welby Van Horn, and he was deep into balance. Arthur Ashe made a comment years ago that if you really want a good instruction, go there. And he wants all the students after a lesson to go in front of a plate glass window and rehearse. And when you use the word rehearse, I can remember the rehearsing drills. And then Tom would say to me with humor, but very cutting, he says, Jim, if you can't rehearse gracefully, forget playing the ball even close to gracefully. And so I was asked 5 minutes a day to rehearse. And I confess I did it probably 10 minutes a week. And even now with students, when I'm picking up balls, I say, go ahead and rehearse. And I guess I haven't sold it enough or demanded it, because after a while they just stand there and look at me like, well, when can we hit more balls? And so what this was really about and is about is awareness, and whether or not you can truly get into your awareness of what your posture is and what the balance is. And I worry now that the game is taught upside down. They teach the swings, they teach the spin, the body is rarely addressed. And even you read this stuff far closer than I. Do any of our internet colleagues, that's a neutral term, do they ever talk about posture?
Not often enough.
So.
I mean, it should be done.
I don't think so.
No, I agree.
And that was the first thing I saw with this guy taking lessons from another coach. It was like, you don't have to have anybody's high performance. Get the guy on balance. But like, who knows, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe that's why you win so much. Maybe you shouldn't tell everybody this. Well, you know, what the heck? Winning's more fun, generally.
Right. You know, another thing that I sort of thought about with the all-court player is, I think now, and this has been over the last 7-10 years, is I kind of feel like I want to force my opponent to have to be an all-court player. I want to force my opponent to have to visit all parts of the court. Exactly. I don't want to keep my opponent just back in the baseline by trying to go from corner to corner. I want a drop shot. I want to bring them in. I want to lob. I want them to have to visit all parts of the court in both singles and doubles. I mean, I think, you know, a lot of players think, well, doubles is pretty straightforward. Not so much. So it could be that you know, in doubles, I'm the only guy in the backcourt because the guy's hit a big first serve. He's come in. My return, he's now played it back to me, right? So the choice is, to me, is to lob, or why not just carve it slow and low underneath him and let my partner have, but in singles for sure. I want to make that opponent be an all-court player. And
especially because they're not.
Well, they're not. And I think the reality of getting older, being a senior player, 60 plus, unless you're really dedicated to fitness, you know, it's sort of an opportunity. I mean, the court doesn't shrink because, oh, you're in the 60s now. Now you get to have a smaller tennis court. No. Now you're in the 70s, you get to have a smaller tennis court. No. So anyway. All right, what do you got for us? You got if we get folks to go over and look at what you're doing, look, you're the one guy online out of our colleagues online who I recommend. Because I know that you know the same stuff that I know, and you know it even deeper than I do. And so I highly encourage anyone who's watching this live thing right now or on the replay. The best link is just to go over to essentialtennisinstruction.com. Mac, is that it? And really kind of take a look at what you're doing on a monthly membership thing.
Well, no, that's just call that the introductory site. And then that can lead you to other things. But most of this started years ago when I was studying in graduate school about motor learning and so forth. And it just every year I discovered something new that it always came back to Tom, even though it wasn't about Tom at all, about balance and even the Alexander technique, which is very obscure for artists and so forth. We had a guy that visited the club once, Gary Edelman. We're hitting balls. And this still was playing pretty good then in my late 30s. And we're hitting him around. And I said, man, you're more graceful than I. And he said, yeah, I went to Tom also. And I said, that doesn't tell me anything. He says, well, I'm also an Alexander teacher. Mm-hmm. So I've done those lessons, and that's just about posture and how to carry and so forth. But, you know, I write about all this stuff, and sometimes deep and sometimes just superficial. But most of the site is still about methods on the serve. And I guess that's either my hobby or my sweet spot. I spent a ton of time on that. And now I like very much what Federer does, because it seems upside down from how it's taught. Is his toss overly high? No, high enough. Does he jump? Not really. Is it effortful? No, not at all. Is it huge? And even the other day, I was sent something from USTA coaches, and it was, I won't use the word hideous, but it seemed to only talk about how big the serves were without any reference to accuracy or placement or anything. And they were talking about this 7-foot guy, Riley Opelka. And I was thinking, man, wouldn't that guy be better if he slowed it down and put more spin on it and placed it? But it's the world we're in. And so one of the things I found from Roger Federer, great quote, is he said, it's so hard to change the serve. The first coach makes all the difference. And that's what I now find. And I've had some luck with some players where I was the first coach and they serve pretty darn good. I'm sure there are better ones than that, but a lot of what I write about is what an adult or a junior with experience could try to do to change. And so similar to you, Brent, you're saying that you could learn the all-court forcing game without necessarily changing your strokes, but changing your court position. I think the same thing can be done on the serve if you stand way inside the baseline so you can't measure if it's in or out. And then you have to get into a box, for example, so you can't fall, or you try different drills. And so that's what I'm working on. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. But lately, when I went through this coaching assessment, it changed me such that I'm much more aware of trying to find out what a student might want and what that student's blocks are and where their awareness is. It's called a paradox of change, but it really implies that I always thought I could just show somebody something and they would change. And now I realize just the opposite, that I want to see if they can see where they're at and then what we explore. But, I don't know if they even that scales anymore, but this is fun because, when you talk about your backhand, we could get together at some point and show versions of how to sting it deep or carve it low. And that's the beauty of the one-hander is they can't tell which one you're going to do. So sure. Still back to trying to build strokes too. And these are all challenges, man. They are for me.
Look, I mean, just to kind of pile on with all the technique that's trying to be taught initially, as opposed to, well, let's talk about where you want to end up in the court or on the court at the end of the point.
Yeah.
The strokes then become just your tools to be able to get you there. Yeah. And whether it's a serve, as you're talking about, it doesn't have to be huge, but it's got to be accurate so that you can play serve and volley and put the serve in the spot that doesn't give the guy a huge opportunity to unload. You can play serve and stay back. And one of the great misnomers of all time, serve and stay back. It should be serve and end up inside the baseline a foot or two.
Yeah. Right.
And be looking for that short ball. I mean, the only reason people serve and stay back is because the serve needs some work.
Yeah.
And they're just fearful that Virginia is going to unload on it. Well, listen, great stuff, Mac. I got to scoot. I've got another little broadcast I got to do. January 2021 physical reboot I'm doing every day. 8 minutes late. That's okay. Folks can wait. Always great to see you. We used to get together for a cup of coffee and meet halfway down there in the Bay Area. That was always great.
We were hitting balls in Berkeley too, out by where was it? Outside of Berkeley, at that public court.
Yes.
Let's do one down the road about a one-handed backhand.
Love it.
And even what would be fun would be to put up a description of a shot. Sting it deep, heavy. How does yours look? How does mine look? What could they take in common? How do you turn that into a lob? How do you turn it into a so that there's sort of not a comparison, but I think that we would have almost all the elements identical in spite of what they said about Tom's students being robots.
Right. Well, Tom did say in that discussion, he did say, even though some players might look a little bit different out there, he said, I can tell you if a player's got the Stowe foundation.
Yeah.
Just because they put their unique personality down on top of that foundation.
Well said.
I can still tell if it's a Stowe foundation. So, all right, guys, listen, go on tennisinstruction.com. I've got a link in the comments over on YouTube. I'm also going to update the description area both at Facebook and YouTube, and I'll put that link in there as well. Mac, as always, a lot of fun. Hope we can do this again soon. I like your idea for a backhand look-see, and we'll do it.
Thanks for this. It was fun.
Good. Guys, get out there today. Help someone else have a spectacular day. I will see you again tomorrow.